the basement can be a lonely place.
Hello? Hello? Is anyone in here?
Yet, at the Classic Guitar Rock podcast, the basement is all that Jeremy and John have. Their wives don't want them geeking out on classic rock in the living room. Can you blame them? But you can help. For as little as $3 a month, you can become a supporter on Patreon. Join today and end the cycle. Visit patreon.com/classic guitar rock. They'll still be in the basement, but at least it's not your basement.
Hello? Is anyone in here?
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Here, ready to move out. Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive and in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now, your hosts, Jeremy Lunnan and John Dimke.
We've got to protect our phony baloney job, gentlemen. We must do something about this immediately.
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
All right, that's kind of some false advertising because this isn't actually the podcast. This is an update, and John's not here. So other than that, completely accurate representation there. Hey, thank you for joining us. We're just, it's Saturday morning here, 10:37 a.m. This is way better than Saturday morning cartoons. I don't even know if they still have Saturday morning cartoons. I don't know. When I was a kid, that was a big deal. Not sure they do that anymore. But anyways, welcome. It's March 25th. Spring is in the air. At least where I live, it's a balmy 33 degrees. And I just wanted to say hi this morning. I got a few emails we'll get to, and then we'll talk about a few news items. And I would love to hear from you. The comments are open. So please go in there, leave your comments, questions, complaints, criticisms, insults, anything you want to do. Love to hear from you in the comments. So leave your comments there if you'd like to. So 2 emails that I want to get to. First off, the first one says, "Hey, Jeremy, love your podcast. Just recently started following you on YouTube also. I listened to your episode about Rat and was super shocked when you mentioned you and your co-host saw them in Lawton, Oklahoma in the summer of 1985. I was stationed at Fort Sill for my AIT, just some military lingo, advanced individual training. I was stationed at Fort Sill for my AIT and was at that same show. It's a small world. Anyway, that was many years ago, my friend, but I still have fond memories of that show and still am a big Rat fan. Not to make us feel old, but I retired from the Army a few years ago. LOL." That does make me feel old. Keep up the good work. That's from TJ Barrett, U.S. Army retired. He has to throw in the retired part. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Thank you, TJ. Thank you for tuning in, or thank you for the email. You might be tuning in. I don't think so, but thank you for the email. Next one. "Hi, CGR. Like you, I'm a big fan of classic rock, but I'm always looking for good new music. Are there any new bands that you like and could recommend?" Bill Grover. Bill, thanks for the email. By the way, the email address, classicguitarrock@mail.com. Love to hear from you. So shoot us an email about anything. Great question. Good new music. Now, I've been accused of being a dinosaur, right? Because obviously my podcast is about music of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. New music that I like. Now, to be honest, most of the new music that I like is new music that's being put out by classic bands. With a few exceptions, right? I've talked about Frontier Records. They're based out of Spain. Frontier Records is a record label that is mass produce classic rock. It's not really classic rock because it's new music, but classic rock in the spirit of classic rock, melodic rock. And there have been a number of bands on there that I've really liked. In fact, when I'm out driving, I have a Frontier Records playlist on Spotify that I just stream. So I hear a lot of new music. So if you like that melodic rock, specifically 80s rock type stuff, there's a lot of good stuff on there. And then a lot of bands that kind of have a classic vibe that feature classic artists, Dead Daisies, right? California Honey. Not really not California Honey, Dirty Honey, California Honey, Dirty Honey. I don't, there's a lot of them. But I would recommend you check out Frontier Records or Frontier Music. I think it's called Frontier Records, but check them out. They have a YouTube channel as well, so you can kind of get a look at what they have. But a lot of the classic bands that have put out new music recently, they will be on Frontier, right? Blue Oyster Cult, their last album I think was on Frontier. Great band, Revolution Saints. They've had like 4 albums out. The Dean Castronovo's the singer, the drummer. He's currently on tour with Journey. Great singer, great drummer. And they featured Jack Blades of Night Ranger and Doug Aldrich, who I love. So they've had a number of albums that are really good. People like Black Swan is kind of a super group with Robin McCauley and Jeff Pilson. Michael Sweet and George Lynch are doing stuff together. And a lot of this is on Frontier. Striper, I think, is on Frontier now. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, because you might be asking me if they're actually new bands that I'm into. And some of these bands at Frontier they're not necessarily new. It's older bands that are brought back together to put music together. Another one that's really fun, Tokyo Motor Fist. Tokyo Motor Fist featuring Steve Brown. Steve Brown was in Trickster. He also subs in with Def Leppard on occasion. Fun 80s sounding melodic rock, catchy hooks, great vocals, that sort of thing. So I'm a big fan of Frontier. So I guess my cop-out answer is just check out Frontier Records, because they have a lot of music. Now, here's the downside of Frontier, right? It's based in Spain, and people have accused them of kind of being like a mass manufacturer, a McDonald's of music, right? They put together these bands and make these records, and then nothing ever happens, right? There's no tours. There's not really much promotion. So you just got to kind of be lucky enough to stumble into these albums and find them and listen to them. And there's a lot of good stuff, but there's no real push behind promoting them. I guess they do concerts in Europe. There'll be a tour, but in terms of any worldwide promotion, it doesn't really happen with Frontier Records. But that doesn't mean there isn't some good music. I mean, I listen to a lot of really good stuff. Again, a lot of classic bands that are putting out new material on Frontiers, and then a lot of these super groups they put together. Joe Lynn Turner has done a lot of stuff, Sunstorm, stuff like that. So if you're a fan of melodic rock, classic rock, you probably want to check out Frontier Records, just because there's some good music to listen to. But I am always open to, people will tell me about a band that I might like, and I'll go check it out. And I think that's great. What's really awesome? I don't know if you've seen the new single from Extreme. Extreme hadn't put anything out for 20 years or something. It is so cool to hear guitar solos, right? This Nuno Betancourt solo on the new song is phenomenal. And, guitar solos have kind of fallen out of favor over the last 20 years. That's what grunge ruined, right? Is guitar solos. Not a big grunge fan. I got to be honest. I mean, there's some okay stuff, but now people want to hear that good 80s rock. That's why all the big tours, right, are these 80s bands coming back. One of the biggest tours last year was Def Leppard and Motley Crue and Poison. That's what people want to hear because it's fun. The guitar playing's good. For so long with all this grunge crap, detuned guitars and no solos and angsty lyrics. It's just no fun. It's just it's creepy, right? And so I think people are coming back to this more classic rock, melodic rock thing. I love it. So Frontier Records, I'm rambling, sorry, but check that out. So those are the emails. I do want to talk about a few news items. Again, comments are open, so if you'd like to comment, love to hear from you. So let's look at some news here. Couple things. Queen and Adam Lambert have announced North American tour dates. The run of shows will begin on October 4th in Baltimore and include stops in cities like Toronto, New York, Boston, Nashville, Chicago, San Francisco, and LA. This is from Ultimate Classic Rock. As with their last tour, Lambert, Brian May, and Roger Taylor will be supported on stage by keyboard player and musical director Spike Edney, bassist Neil Fairclough, and percussionist Tyler Warren. So, I've seen some clips of Queen with Adam Lambert, and I think Adam Lambert does a really good job. Remember the Queen plus Paul Rogers thing about 15 years ago? They actually toured with Paul Rogers. That was interesting too. So on YouTube, you can check that out. And I really dug it. I mean, when I heard Queen with Paul Rogers, how's that going to work? It's pretty good though. So he's doing the Freddie Mercury songs that he can do, but they're also doing a lot of Paul Rogers songs, right? They're doing Bad Company stuff and Free stuff. And on some of the Queen songs, it's I Want It All, for example. The version that they do with Paul Rogers when they do I Want It All, it's awesome. It sounds like it's meant to be, right? Other Queen songs, not so good. But in general, I was real impressed with what they did with Paul Rogers. The clips I've seen with Adam Lambert are pretty good. And Adam Lambert does a better job doing the Freddie Mercury stuff than Paul Rogers in general, right? So I'm always excited when tours are announced of these bands, and people can debate, it's only 2 original members. Freddie's been dead for so long. John Deacon's not there, and that's going to happen, guys, from now on, because most of these classic bands don't have every member who's still alive, right? So the only way they're going to tour is with new people. I'm a fan of good music, so that doesn't bug me. Some of the purists do not like that, right? Well, you can't call it Queen if it's not Freddie Mercury, whatever. I'm just glad they're out touring. Then we got the other issue, astronomical ticket prices. So people have to decide, is it really worth $200 or $300 or more, depending on the artist, to go see a show? I don't know. That's, what you got to decide. But that's just the reality is most of these classic bands, very few classic bands still have all the original members. So what are they to do? Just quit? They've got to make a living, right? So I'm like, if people are willing to buy tickets, great, more power to them. Leonard Skinner. Okay, let's talk about Leonard Skinner in that camp. Are there any original members actually touring with them anymore? I know that Medlock has been in Leonard Skinner. He was in Skinner in the very early days before he started Blackfoot, and he's been back and forth. So he's kind of an original member. But with Gary Rosington passing last week, I'm sorry, I'm not up on all my Skinner. I think Medlock's the only one that you could even kind of loosely call an original member. And yet, when you see them live, I just yesterday happened to be watching a video of them performing live in Las Vegas at the end of 2022. So this is, in the last couple months. They were really good show. And it looks like they've picked up one of their guitar players, can't think of his name, is the guy that was in Black Star Riders. He left Black Star Riders, and now I think he's in Skinner. If it looks like the same guy, I have to do a little research, but I think it's the same guy. But guys, they sounded awesome. And Johnny Van Zant, who of course is the youngest brother of Donnie Van Zant and brother of Ronnie, who was in 38 Special. Did I get that mixed up? Donnie? I think Donnie was in Skinner. Ronnie was in 38 Special. Do I have that mixed up? Whatever. At least Johnny's a sibling, right? And he's a great singer, and he can cover all that Skinner stuff. So, yeah, the purists will say this is not really Skinner, but you know what? They're putting on a great show. They sound good. If you go and see them, you'll enjoy it, right? So that's kind of the same thing with this Queen deal. Anyways, they've announced a tour. Queen fans will either be super excited or super annoyed, depending on what their take is on all of that. So that's one news item. Okay, another little story that I wanted to cover. I mentioned Jack Blades actually responding to that email. Night Ranger's very active band. I mean, they've been touring a lot over the past few years and still sound pretty doggone good. They've got, I think, all the original members except Jeff Watson is no longer there. So they have a new guitar player. At one point, Joel Hoekstra, who's now in Whitesnake, if Whitesnake still exists, but he was in Night Ranger for a while. But they had to schedule 3 shows on their current tour after singer-bassist Jack Blades suffered a health emergency. They haven't really said what the emergency was, but it did mean they had to cancel or reschedule 3 shows. So good luck to Jack. Hopefully he has a speedy recovery. He's still got a lot of energy. His work with Revolution Saints is awesome. He still runs around a lot for a guy. He's got to be in his mid-60s at least, right? But still seems to be healthy and having fun. And Night Ranger still sounds really good. So more power to them. Hopefully a speedy recovery for Jack, so he will be back soon. All right. And a couple other things I wanted to go over here. Michael Anthony is teaming up with members of Aerosmith and Bon Jovi for a little project. Former Van Halen bassist Michael Anthony revealed that he has a new project in the works with members of Aerosmith and Bon Jovi. Where is this from? Oh, this is also from Ultimate Classic Rock. Quote, I wasn't going to mention anything about it, but there is a little side project thing that I've kind of been speaking to some people and might be doing a couple things with. Anthony confessed on Trunk Nation. I don't want to get ahead of myself and mention too much, but it might involve Phil X, who's currently the guitarist in Bon Jovi, and John Douglas, who is the touring drummer for Aerosmith right now. Douglas and Anthony have some history together. The drummer served as a drum tech for Alex Van Halen during the bassist's tenure with Van Halen. In addition to having played with Aerosmith and ZZ Top, Douglas is a beloved visual artist known for customizing the drum sets of some of the biggest of some of rock's biggest acts. When asked who will be fronting the new group, Anthony was coy. He said, quote, "I don't want to mention any names, but a really, really cool singer," the bassist explained. "And we're recording just for fun right now, some stuff. That's all I can say." So that's kind of interesting. By the way, if you haven't checked out the Chickenfoot albums, you should check out the Chickenfoot albums. Chickenfoot came out 2006, 2007. There were 2 albums, I think. There was the first album called Chickenfoot, and then the second album was called Chickenfoot 3, just to be confusing. But that featured, of course, Michael Anthony, Sammy Hagar, Joe Satriani, and Chad Smith of the Chili Peppers, and really good albums and really good music. And if you haven't listened to those albums, you really should. And it was great. And they toured, were successful, had successful tours. Of course, now Michael Anthony is part of Sammy's touring group, Sammy Hagar and the Circle, which features Vic Jones on guitar, Jason Bonham on drums. And then, of course, you got Sammy and Michael. But they're just great. If you have it, I saw them a few years back. If you have a chance to check them out, again, you will not be disappointed. Guys, Sammy Hagar's 75 years old, and he still can sing really well, still has a lot of energy. Michael Anthony, underrated as a bass player and very underrated as a vocalist. His harmony vocals, that was so much of the Van Halen sound. I think people lose sight of that, how much he contributed to Van Halen. But anyways, if you ever get a chance to see Sammy Hagar in the Circle, or if there's any new Chickenfoot material or the old Chickenfoot material, make sure you go back and check that out. Okay, another item here. I'm sure you've seen the headlines about these crazy ticket prices. Springsteen, Taylor Swift. I mean, you're probably not a Taylor Swift fan. Maybe you are, but you might be a Springsteen fan. Anyways, there's a lot of discussion about these astronomical ticket prices and fees that are associated with buying tickets through, the various outlets. Neil Young had some interesting things to say. Neil Young's kind of become a grumpy old man, right? But he's makes some good points here. He says that concert touring is broken. What does he mean by that? This is everything's from Ultimate Classic Rock, all the good headlines I'm finding. So if you don't check out Ultimate Classic Rock, I got to give them credit. Check out Ultimate Classic Rock. It says, count Neil Young among those musicians who blame escalating ticket prices for ruining the concert industry. He says, quote, "It's over. The good old days are gone. I get letters blaming me for $3,000 tickets for a benefit I'm doing. That money does not go to me or the benefit. Artists have to worry about ripped off fans blaming them for Ticketmaster add-ons and scalpers." Concert tours are no longer fun, Young opined, pointing to ticket fees and scalpers as the culprit. Concert tours, they are not what they were. And guys, it's a tough situation because radio is completely different, right? The record industry is completely different. So, for good and bad, right? So back in the 70s and 80s, right, you got a record deal, and then the record companies distributed the records and promoted them and did all of that stuff. And radio, beginning really in the 80s, became such a formatted, homogenized, generic product that you literally, it didn't matter where in the country you were listening, what radio station you were listening to. And I was in radio for over a decade, so I kind of know what I'm talking about here, or at least I have some experience to tie this to. I mean, every radio station sounds exactly the same. And that all kind of started with this whole formatting thing that really came on strong in the 80s, that stations would have a consultant, right, that would program their stations, and you would play this song, and you know, and some stations, they had their high rotation songs might play every 90 minutes or every 2 hours. So every 2 hours you're going to hear the hot songs, and there might be 8 songs on that high rotation list, and then the next segment in their rotation might get played every 4 hours, and you're going to hear the same songs every 4 hours, right? And so it just became a super tight playlist, super formatted, and the record companies dictated, here's what you're going to play. And there was very little creativity or very little independence of the radio stations, right? Well, the record industry's changed, right? There's artists like, I've mentioned this before, Billie Eilish, for example, Justin Bieber. And I know these might not be the bands that you're fans of, but they're an example of how the model has changed, right? Billie Eilish and her brother produced a record, recorded an album in their bedroom, right? That went on to be a platinum album. And all of a sudden, and then you throw in, you know, streaming way back. Remember Metallica and the, can't even remember the platform now that Metallica had their whole battle with about streaming. But streaming now, Spotify, artists are really in a catch-22. They got to be on Spotify. They got to be on the streaming services, because that's the way we listen to music now. People don't go out and buy albums anymore. And yet they make so little money on the streaming platforms. It's ridiculous for the artists. So you understand why artists are not happy about that. But if they don't play, then their music won't get heard at all. So many of them are like, okay, yeah, I'm going to make 1/10 of what I would have made back in the 70s or 80s, but at least I'll make something, right? Because no one goes and buys albums anymore. So that has completely changed. The upside is anyone can make an album, right? You're not reliant on a record company signing a contract with you. And those contracts, by the way, ripped off so many artists. I mean, there were bands that had multi-platinum albums, and when it was all said and done, they didn't have any money, right? Because they have to pay back the label for producing this and for doing all this. So it was a scam. And what will really make your blood boil, you go back further to the 40s and 50s, especially with blues artists and R&B artists, that they literally were robbed, stolen. Okay. These early Willie Dixon can tell you, these early blues and R&B artists literally were just cheated out of everything and died penniless. Right. So there's a lot of bad stuff, and now there's just different kind of bad stuff. So those are the challenges that artists have in the music business these days. And back to this point that Neil Young is making. So one of the only ways left for artists to really make money is tours. Except now all the intermediaries, all the middlemen like Ticketmaster, okay, they're taking so much money and adding so much in terms of fees that they're basically outpricing many people that would go to shows, right? There is no band to me that's worth paying $200 to go see. I'm sorry. Okay. Not when I can just watch a video of them, watch a YouTube, watch a concert. So, and 200's cheap. You know, if you're going to go see Bruce Springsteen or the Eagles or someone like that, I mean, you're probably looking at $400 or $500 or more. That's ridiculous. I don't care who it is. I'm not going to pay that much to see him. Right. So artists are really getting squeezed. So Neil's got a very good point. It's some of it is Neil Young was around in the 70s, right? So in the 70s, it was much harder to get into music, right? You'd have to have a contract. So Joe in his basement couldn't make an album and compete, right? So yeah, it was great for Neil Young. It was great for people that were established and actually had a record contract. It was the halcyon days of the 70s, right? It was sex, drugs, rock and roll, and they were all happy, right? So it was much more selective and elitist back then. So on the one hand, it's way more democratic now in that anyone can produce an album, and if they can find an audience for it, they can be very successful. Justin Bieber, he started out as a kid on YouTube singing songs, and all of a sudden, he's a megastar, right? And there's a number of people that started out on YouTube. So from that standpoint, it's much more democratic. The barriers to entry are lower, but then once you're in there, the opportunities to make money or the amounts of money that used to be available aren't really there. So it's kind of a mixed bag. So Neil brings up some good points about, scalpers, about, fees. And guys, it's the same thing with something like the Super Bowl, right? The Super Bowl, huge corporations go in and buy every ticket, right? To either give out to clients or whatever, to the point that if you wanted to buy a Super Bowl ticket, no telling how many thousands of dollars you'd pay, right? And so concerts are kind of turning into that same elitist thing, at least the big tours, okay? Now, the good news is a lot of the bands that we like, the classic rock bands, they tour on circuits where you can go see them at a casino, at a fair. I mean, you could go see Cheap Trick for $30, right? Which they still put on a great show. So it's a complicated, messy deal for sure. So anyways, so those are the few news items that I wanted to cover. I just wanted to check in and say good morning to y'all. And thank you so much for tuning in. I would love to hear from you. Shoot me an email at classicguitarrock@mail.com and share your favorite classic rock memory or anything else you'd like to share, because I'd love to share that with our listeners. Thank you for tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and we'll see you next time for another Classic Guitar Rock update. Take care. We'll see you.